Hello!
Welcome back to Rainbow Speaks.
Rainbow Stage's first and only official Rainbow Stage podcast.
I am your host, Cuinn Joseph.
I'm your other host, Cuinn Joseph.
We are not brother and sister.
We are. You can't keep saying that. What, you don't want to be brother and sister?
I was just thinking that we could try something new.
Like what? Like work friends?
Colleagues? I don't know. Maybe I want to do a little weather small talk at the water cooler before we jump into we're best friends.
I never said we're best friends, but we are brother and sister regardless of...
We're not best friends?
Oh, no. I mean, we can be.
It's dead. I'm serious. Daphne, stop the podcast.
No, you don't.
Are we not best friends?
Don't stop the podcast. This is fine. I think we're best friends. Are we best friends?
I was under the impression that we were best friends.
Of course we're best friends. See? Yeah.
I don't feel that comforted, but
you're my best friend, and so are you at home. For the next hour, we're all best friends.
I guess
aren't we?
You could say that.
Yeah. So, Kara, how's it going? How are things going in your life?
Oh, good. I've got lots of things going on that I can't talk about right now. So
great, but things are happening,
yes,
right?
But I do want to talk about you.
Why?
You have something special coming up that once this episode is out, everyone will know.
Yeah, this will have happened, so I can fully say I will have proposed to my current partner.
Wow.
Of 7 and some years.
Gosh, about time, huh?
Hey, you sound like her. But yes, yeah, and so we're doing a whole big thing. I wrote her a song. There's a fake play that she's gonna attend that ends with me singing her a song and asking her to be my wife.
So if this part is still in the episode, when you watch it, she'll have said yes.
She will have said yes. If it's cut, she'll have said no, and you won't know. So there it is.
It's really exciting to find out.
I'll have a ring on this finger, or however that works.
Anyway, maybe we should jump into
Let's jump into
our
the
episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess without further ado, let's get speaking.
So today's topic is Indigeneity and musical theatre.
Indigenous peoples in Canada have a rich history of storytelling, song, and dance. Because of course they do. Any cultural groups and or nations are, in part, defined by their artistic tradition. So, of course, the cultural groups, as enduring and long-standing as the various Indigenous peoples in this country, have a multitude of stories, dances, and pieces of music that represent their beliefs and values. I'm sure you're thinking, duh, obviously Indigenous peoples have artistic traditions, but have you ever wondered why you never hear those traditions being told on stage in a musical theater format?
The ingredients of story and song and dance are so perfect for musical theater, and yet, in doing my research for this podcast, I searched for Canadian Indigenous musical theater and was met with only a handful of results. That is, Corey Payette's Children of God, Corey Payette and Julia McIsaac's Les Filles du Roi, or Starwalker by, you guessed it, Corey Payette. Which, by the way, are all beautiful from what I've heard and seen, but it made me question, how could this be? How can there only be a handful of Indigenous musicals? And how can they all be seemingly by one person?
Maybe it's a lack of interest from Indigenous creators. Maybe it's a lack of resources for Indigenous creators. Maybe it's being told that there's a lack of interest from the mainstream theater community. Maybe it's a history of being marginalized, silenced by mainstream theater communities. And maybe, just maybe, whatever the cause, it's all about to change.
Because right now, there are more initiatives to get Indigenous stories on stage, to get Indigenous students involved in theater, and to provide resources for Indigenous peoples to create than I have ever seen in my, albeit short, lifetime. And to talk to us about what it means to be an Indigenous artist right now, as well as the cross-section of Indigeneity and musical theater, we have with us Julia Davis and Seraph-Eden Boroditsky.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to the digital studio.
Yeah. Rainbow Stage's digital studio.
Yeah.
We
Very
have
nice and professional.
Yes,
Yeah,
thanks
we've
for
got
having us.
cameras lighting a whole crew. Say hi, crew.
Hi, crew.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And they're funny. It's so nice to have both of you. And we know you, but the people at home might not. So if you would be willing, would you give them a little bit of an introduction to who you are as a person, maybe who you are as a theater artist?
My name's Julia.
I am an Inuk artist. I've lived in Winnipeg my whole life. I was born in Churchill. I was adopted when I was a baby. I've lived in Winnipeg my whole life. Started singing, dancing at quite a young age. I went through the Faculty of Music at the U of M, studied classical voice. Kara was also there.
Yes, I was.
I wasn't there.
Well, it's
Yeah.
okay. Well, maybe we can share a moment without everyone chiming in.
Maybe.
Maybe, just
yeah,
maybe.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I did the Village Conservatory program for musical theater. I've been recently doing some contracts with some of the theater companies in the city, Rainbow Stage.
Wow,
what do you know?
That's one. We do have a running joke where we have to say the name Rainbow Stage a number of times before Daphne gives us the thumbs up. So
Okay, that was
thank you.
one.
Yeah, thank you for throwing it out
That
there.
was one. I'm doing a contract right now with MTYP.
Yay!
Yeah.
Huge fans of MTYP here as well. Yeah.
Yes.
I've dipped my toes in at composing within the past couple years, which has been really cool.
Very cool. And I will say, on Rainbow Stage, you played Toto.
Yes.
You also did you understudy Dorothy? Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So you had a lot of hats wearing. But I just feel like we need to say and give you a
From
huge
the
shout out.
right off the bat.
Yeah. If the world needs to know, if you didn't see, Julia as Toto was the greatest experience ever. I just want to say, such a wonderful, like, I don't know how to describe it in terms of, like, I don't know if you are a puppeteer going into this experience.
I know. I guess maybe now. I don't know.
I've heard from every person who's seen the show, they're like, great show. My favorite was Toto.
Really?
Literally,
Yeah.
I'm not joking,
Aw.
like everyone, and I have to agree. So,
That's so kind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
of course, I just thought we needed to fangirl a little bit.
Yeah,
off the
give
top.
you your flowers.
Yeah. And Seraph.
Yeah, my name is Seraph, and I am a Métis person from Winnipeg here. Went to the University of Manitoba, for Native Studies and Sociology, and I'm a visual artist, so who also has a background in classical dance, so ballet, tap, jazz. But and also a lifetime of traditional Métis folk dance, and I had a family group, like people would joke that we were like the Von Trapps.
Oh, fun.
Which was also one of my favorite musicals of all time. So it's really big in our house for obvious reasons. And we used to sing and dance and travel around sort of the Prairie provinces and Minnesota. I was young. I'm not quite sure like where on that border we were, but just kind of all over the place throughout my childhood. And how I came to be in the professional theater world. There was a Winnipeg Arts Council sponsored grant or fellowship created. Winnipeg Arts Council started this fellowship, which was the Indigenous Arts Leaders Fellowship, and I was the first full-time fellow, and I was stationed at MTC because they wanted to start doing this kind of reconciliatory work. A lot of eclectic stuff in my life, but why I'm here and I know you was through that journey.
Right. No, it's so awesome to have you both here. In our, intro, I think it's sort of like a tongue-in-cheek musing, but like for you, why do you feel like there isn't a lot of Indigenous musical theater out there? Or if I'm being totally ignorant, is there a lot of Indigenous musical theater out there that I'm just missing?
No, I don't think you're missing anything.
Good.
I mean, we all are missing lots of things.
Yeah, sorry,
that
I'm
could
missing
be.
it from our lives.
But yes,
but
we
not
are.
from- yeah.
But there's not a lot out there.
Why?
Yeah.
It is.
You have all the answers, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell
Yeah,
us
and we
why?
speak for everybody
Yes.
as
Yeah.
well.
We want to be
we
clear.
just did
It's-
this last episode. Yeah, we
Yeah,
all
we-
spoke for
Yeah.
all of our cultures, we're all always a monolith. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Great. So,
So you
we're
can
on the same
answer
page.
this.
But if you have any questions, at least for you personally, why do you think there is that lack of representation there? Is it that as clear as because of the hundreds of years of oppression and like the fallout from that?
I feel like when I think about like the community that my birth family is from, how lucky I've been to, I mean, in some ways, like when I was adopted and I moved into River Heights, Winnipeg, I got all these opportunities to go to dance classes, to go to singing lessons, to, all these things that there's not that same outreach or like education, I guess,
the
up north.
resources
Just
available.
resources,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
resources up north in those communities. And it's expensive to fly down. It's expensive when everything is already so expensive to buy food and to buy everything. It's like, can you on top of that add lessons and everything? That I don't know. That's like a tiny little part of it.
That's a pretty big part of it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, lack of access. So it's interesting. I mean, we just had this conversation about like race and representation, and some of these themes, obviously there's going to be a large crossover of one of the biggest problems that we've identified, not that we've identified it, it's been out there, but is like there is a huge lack of resources and availability to do these things. And I think maybe moreover, even if the resources, so I'm a person, we took music lessons growing up. I didn't do singing, I didn't do dance, any of those sorts of lessons. I didn't really get into theater until university, but I think I'm doing pretty well now, right? Like, and it's not even that you even need that basis and that level of like every week I need to be doing this dance and this singing lesson, this everything, but having somebody willing to even take a chance to hear you or to help you on that journey later on. I think that's absolutely huge.
Because if you have nothing, how are you going to, first of all, know that you can get into a room? Because you can't. You don't know that these opportunities exist, and who's going to see you? Who's going to invite you into the room?
Because they ask for, what's your degree?
Everyone is different. What I've learned through my like social justice work, the actual, not the activism, but advocacy and education part of it, is that all the talks about and educating people and ourselves about like intersectionality and what that is. And so because we're all completely individual people who are totally informed by not just the experiences that we have through the parents that raise us, but the way that the world interacts with us. And so if there was somebody just like me, then I'd go, sure, why don't I deserve it just as much as that person?
Right.
But nobody is just like me. Why isn't there representation, or why aren't there more Indigenous people in musical theater or like theater in general? A big part of it is the access, right? And the knowing that it's even there. The why should it be important to people? I have done education coordination for like Prairie Theater Exchange, and I'm with Shakespeare in the Ruins now, and like trying to indigenize some of that space in some way and help them figure that out. And so it's not that there aren't kids that you can't pull into the room, but there's different needs for different people, and that's not always on racial lines. It's on an individual basis or a community basis. And so do people at specifically theaters and theater outreach departments, for lack of a better word, do they understand the differences between communities of people and how to do that outreach? So there's a lot of outreach into the community, but those members of whatever communities they're reaching out to, and it's like, this doesn't speak to us at all. And it doesn't meet the need. We don't have needs met that make it accessible for our kids. So you have a whole bunch of kids coming to downtown after school in the wintertime, and it gets dark an hour before they have to leave. And my suggestion to that was, well, I know what we have to do. You have to fund me driving, going and picking people up and dropping them off. And it's like that gets lost on people. Or we understand, but we don't have the money.
And the program can't run. Right?
And it's measuring everybody's ability against a template that was for a very specific group of people in a very specific time. If the pandemic 2020 did anything, it was shining a spotlight on just how far afoot from each other those accessibility lines are, you know?
And it's interesting because there are a ton of mentorship programs and opportunities for a lot of artists. And in those opportunities, they often say, we're holding this space, X amount of space for BIPOC and equity-seeking groups. But it's still within that, like you said, that template of like the people who already have the privilege and access can go apply. But if they don't, they haven't made it any more accessible. They just wrote down that you can.
Those people are invited.
You're invited, but I'm not invited if I can't get there, or I can't do that, or I can't afford the membership fee or the thing like.
Yeah, and I say this so often whenever I speak on panels or anything when it comes to equity in theater, is the amount of unpaid mentorships for people of color or Indigenous people and the LGBTQ community, any vulnerable, underrepresented community. The amount of unpaid mentorships that people offer is, I'm just going to go ahead and say, bonkers. I know. I used the B word.
It's pretty strong.
For lack of better words, for lack of more appropriate words.
Keep that in.
But what doesn't make sense is that is the problem. It's not the training, it's the access to literal financial resources to take the training.
Yes.
But if instead there was a version of training that is, here's like a mentorship program, and here's a few $100s to do it. And it's a little bit less strict in terms of what your time commitment is. So we don't end up paying you $5.50 per hour for you to come to do this thing for an honorarium of $100 or whatever. But instead, you have opportunities where you create in the budget in the first place. You create something that is, we have set aside money to hire somebody to learn how to do what it is that we do. Instead of, let's get somebody to learn how to do what it is we do by shadowing us. We don't take a pay cut. We don't have to pay them anything. And then we're upset that they're not, champing
taking
at
that
the bit.
and doing
Exactly.
it. And if I'm giving them that opportunity, then why am I not seeing them now later in the community doing design or acting or whatever? Why aren't they there?
I think that everything needs to be, well, I just mentioned intersectionality, but everything needs to be seen as interconnected. That's a worldview that I come from and that many Indigenous people do come from, and that things they don't happen by themselves. They're not separate. Even if they seem unrelated, they affect each other. They can be unrelated and still touching,
Yeah.
That all those access points and then some, are the tangible and the real. The other side of that is historic lack of representation, and not just the lack of representation, and the opposite of inclusion, but what has the representation been, and that a lot of Indigenous, filmmakers will say have taken it, or actors who have become filmmakers, made that transition because they're like, there ain't nothing here for us. And what we are given is outside of the comfortable operations of our cultures. Because we're all living in this same society, right? Mm-hmm. We're all speaking English to each other. I always say this. People are going to hear this over and over again, but it is so true. We are all speaking English. We are not speaking the same language. And when you come from the dominant hierarchy, the dominant culture, you think all of that is normal. It's unlearning everything you thought you knew. That word again, right? Unlearning. Mm-hmm. Unlearn everything you thought you knew and start to think like other people so that you can incorporate that whole rich area of knowledges, plural, from any number of cultures and people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is access, but it's also racism. It's also a lack of representation. It's also bastardized representation. It's feeling alienated. It's feeling bullied. It's feeling like, oh my, I have to go out into the world now every day and know what the onslaught of like overt and covert abuse I'm going to take, and not just reflected at me or inflicted on me. It's what then I see happening all around me. And like, Lord, that's a really exhausting existence. Mm-hmm. Who the hell has time for some musical theater program if the person who's coordinating it isn't taking care of that child that we want to come in?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's something really interesting when people spin it and be like, well, what about looking inward and and treating it as a problem, like an issue of like mindfulness and a perspective that they're not having. It's a really, when people don't realize that how privileged you are to go to therapy and go to yoga and be mindful, like that's a privilege. Mm-hmm. To even be able to start doing that internal work. You need the basic necessities of like food and shelter before you get to dance class. You know what I mean? Like, of course. But I also wanted to touch on something that you were saying earlier about you come into a community that doesn't necessarily want what you have to sell. Now, you just describe your family as kind of like the Von Trapp or what family and whatnot. How much? Because I've been in community. I've done work with. I was in a school where there's a high Indigenous population, and they were teaching Death of a Salesman. The middle America, American dream, anti-capitalist of whatever of like. of Arthur Miller is that's gonna speak to these kids? No.
Well, it could have if it was done smartly, but it sounds like it wasn't. It sounds like they just took that script and
and of course,
threw a
you're
suit
gonna
on
find
the
there's
kid.
themes that you can pull from and do.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, but there's a little bit of like find what actually connects to this community, or listen to what they actually want.
Do the people that have programmed that, do they even know what they want from it? Like, sure, you can use any medium. You can use any play. You can use any medium. You can use any genre. You can use any of that. If it is intentional, if you know what your goal is, I'm sure that there was, like you said, there are some themes there that could have been used. I'm sure that there is language that is used in the play that's not used in the everyday vernacular. And so let's dissect this and connect to this. But that clearly was not the intention.
No. And so anyway, that was what I wanted to segue to also is, Julia, I know you're doing, you talked about composition and creation. I mean, I know a little bit about your work. Do you mind just sharing what you're currently working on? Because I know you're working in Indigeneity and musical theater.
Wow.
And I want to hear about your project, because this is, to me, one of the big solutions is it's not create something and then bring it to someone. It's create someone for someone.
Well, I had this idea. I was in the Village Conservatory for music theater, and our project was it was a creation project, so just anything. And I was kind of struggling with my idea. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted it to be something important to me, but I didn't know what to do. I wanted to write a song. I wanted to, and then I don't know if anyone was in town for this, but we had a magnetic storm, and the northern lights were out in the city, and I could see them from my backyard. And I had just been talking to my grandmother earlier that week, and she was telling me the legend of the northern lights. And she lived in an igloo until she was 9. So she has a lot of stories and a lot of legends that she likes to tell. And so when I saw the northern lights, I was like, I think this is a sign. I was like, I think this is it. I think. So at first I thought I wanted to write a song. And then when I was thinking about the legend and the story, and I had recently joined TikTok and just and I had followed a lot of composition accounts and people that were writing TikTok musicals, which I thought was something that was really cool. And I was like, I don't think that that's something that I could do. So I wrote a song, and it was kind of like the main character's big like I want kind of song. Like I want to get out of this. I want to get out of this town. I want to have a new life. So I wrote that song. I posted it online, and it kind of got a little bit
It blew up.
She's being modest.
She went viral, baby.
I believe, was there not a Disney account that shared it or liked it or whatever? What was that?
Yeah, it was like a minute-long video. I posted it. It started getting some traction. People started liking it, and then I think Disney on Broadway commented on it and said like this is really great or something, and I ran downstairs. I was like, Mom, Mom, you're not gonna believe it. So yeah, and then that kind of like, and I was already so excited, but that kind of just was like, okay, like I didn't know if that was something that people would want to see, if it was something that they like people would be interested in, even though it's something that I'm so interested in telling, I'm interested in sharing. But that was just like the final little like push, like you can do it. Through the Vic, I kept working on it some more. I wrote another song, and Paul DeGers was a great help with that, and working with me on composing that song. And yeah, I've been working on that ever since, slowly but surely. It's, something I'm very excited about, and it's a little scary because then I kept posting more, and people were like, more, we want more, we want it now, and I was like, okay, I'm trying. But yeah, it's something I'm pretty excited about.
That's amazing. I think what's cool is we talked about this a little bit last time, but it's sort of like people always talk about what do people want. There's always this idea of like, when you're marketing for something, there's like a subscriber base, and they like shows with this kind of thing and this kind of family and this kind, and it's like what people want is good art. And I remember I saw that the song you posted. I saw the one that you did at the Vic's show. It's what people want. It transcends like the marketing lines of we need this and this and this. No, it's just like if you do a good show about a young Indigenous girl, people will eat it up if it's a good show. You know what I mean? And that's. So
if you could hurry up and finish that,
yeah.
So we could
No.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think the problem is the fact that you did it on TikTok.
Well, they were so confused. They were like, "What's taking so long?" I was like, "What do you mean?"
It's only a minute long. I think that there's always something interesting, a little bit of that idea of like tokenism of like, you're this, and I know it's not quite this,
Yeah.
but you're this enough.
Yeah.
How much do you feel that you're, because you, I don't know if you know this, you're a visible minority. I know. But there's something really interesting about like how being a visible minority can inform like the work you do and how you feel about the work you do. And I mean, I'll go ahead and say this. After George Floyd, absolute tragedy, I got a lot more work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because people were a lot more interested. And it's really hard to separate, like, I knew that I know, and I'm confident in this, and I'm going to say this confidently, I'm a talented artist.
Yes.
I know that what I do is good.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of me where I'm like, are they asking me to write this thing because of George Floyd and because I look enough like him?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm dark enough.
Yeah.
Or because, they need to check the boxes now because there's a big push. There's always that doubt in the back of my mind of like, am I a token in this case, or am I just checking a box, or did I actually earn this?
It's so interesting.
And so I just want to ask, like, for you, how much has that visible minority, how does that inform your career at all?
I definitely have felt that. And a lot of it comes from, it usually happens that like I get an opportunity, I get a call back, maybe an opportunity, I tell a friend about it, or maybe this isn't a friend, I don't know, I tell someone about it and they say something like, oh, that's so great that they're, looking to diversify. Oh, that's so great that they're, looking to, one little tiny voice is like, oh my God, that's the only reason, you know, not that I am talented or that I worked really hard. No, it's really hard to struggle with that, because then it makes like the wins, because like you have a moment of like, oh my gosh, yes, I got the role, but then that voice going like, you only got it because X and whatever, and like what are people going to say, or like what are people thinking, like even if they don't say it, like I'm just like, I know they're thinking it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so hard to like separate that.
And what a stressful, because we just gave you so much praise for the Rainbow Stage role. And also, Julia didn't sing on Rainbow Stage.
I barked.
But Julia has a phenomenal voice and is a great musician. And there's so much like clear talent there. And yet, even you are still having like those doubts sometimes. And that's part of kind of what you were saying of like, even with the success and even with the wins, what an existence it is to have that, and how exhausting is it to feel, even at your most successful, that you're still either you don't quite belong or you only belong because of this thing.
Kind of makes me think, because a lot of organizations, like you said, with the work you do and are having, Indigenous fellowships and a lot of theater companies are trying to sort of have someone come in to lead them in the right direction. But it's still within the constructs of their colonized space, and whether or not they're actually willing to blow it all up and fully decolonize their space.
Arts, for the most part, that's where the anti-capitalist commie lefties, these are the spaces where those people exist. But again, to the naked eye, to the conditioned eye, that looks like a very liberal space. It looks like a very, and it is to an extent. And as someone who is white, but has parents who both have racialized identities and all kinds of privilege, but then being able to see all of this stuff, to the average liberal person, they're like, oh, those bohemians, those lesbians, those like, those hippies or whatever it is, right? But people from purposefully marginalized communities who are seemingly welcomed into those spaces, maybe in some cases, who are invited in, usually in our experience over the last couple of years, after crisis. It seemingly is like that kind of space, but it is also totally regulated, for lack of a better word, by institutional hierarchy, by institutions that are working within a system that operates to maintain power. And I have found that it doesn't really matter so much maybe the size of company or how well funded they are. And then there are people who really, really, like whole institutions, usually the smaller ones, except for Rainbow. I will give Rainbow the credit it deserves. I have done hours and hours and hours of work with the company and with individuals within the company, but the people really do want to get it right. Mm-hmm. And so, well, what's the solution to that? Total anarchy. No, I'm kidding. Maybe I'm not
Maybe
kidding.
not, though.
But it's a very sticky place to be in, because then, you know, I almost wanted to take control of this interview for a second and ask you both the question back. And this ties into it perfectly, I think. So you think you have those roles because now is it because I am good and it's on my own merit? Or is it because, and I do think it is on merit, whether it is tokenization or not, right? They could pick anyone, but they came to you, and that's because you have talent. So it's like, what do you want to do with that?
Right.
And does it matter? If you are like firm and confirmed to yourself that you are good and you have a voice that other people need to hear and you have a look that other people need to see and you have ideas that need to be in that room, then I feel bad for the trauma or the harm that it might create. That's the hand you've been dealt, and your gift is being in the room for the next person who thinks that they don't deserve to be there, but they see you there and they go, I deserve to be here.
Ray had said something on our last week's episode that was to the effect of change can only happen if you're in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so
take that opportunity
Yes.
to be in the room.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But you have to take care of yourself, though, because we all know what the potential to being in that room is.
Totally.
Because we were there before they cared if we were there.
Yeah.
I did a couple workshops with Yvette Nolan. Absolutely wonderful playwright and creator and human. Yeah. I love Yvette Nolan. One of the big things that she talked about was sort of the idea, we always hear the term, I even have like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to decolonize.
Yeah.
Because it's so thrown around. Like it's when we overuse these words, they lose what their actual meanings are.
Yep.
And decolonialism is something that's so important. When she talks about decolonization of spaces, a big part of it is sort of dismantling hierarchical structures within a rehearsal space. And this is one thing that I've been really, really fascinated by. I tried to emulate whenever I have the privilege to be in charge of a rehearsal space. It's talking about like the difference in her community of when she's doing specifically work within her Indigenous community of like theater creation. But it's a lot more like holistic, and there's not as much a director person in charge as much as it is a collaborative effort. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that's really, really important, is that when we're talking about that idea of decolonization, that within a theater space, there's something really, really off-putting about those spaces, especially when you come from a background or culture that does not subscribe to that ideology, that sort of like spatial structure. Is there anything that you can think of that helps companies actually decolonize a rehearsal space?
You are making the people in that room safer by doing that, and you're modeling the behavior and the type of organization that you want other people to have their minds open to and go out and emulate in the world. Yes, okay, so all that hits the mark perfect. And who am I to say it does or doesn't? In my opinion, I just agree and I like it. Okay. But how can that space actually be decolonized when it's within an institution that is still running business as usual? That is not to discount that these theater organizations, these theater companies are not doing work. They're all doing great work. Mm-hmm. Some were already further ahead to begin with because that's just what the core of that company was. And then there are other kind of bigger ones or ones geared to different community, demographics or different communities that have more work to do, have different work to do. But the issue with the word decolonization is that if you are not practicing it in all of its collective meaning and form, that ain't what you're doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing something, and it's a good something,
But it's not.
but it's not decolonizing. Yeah. It's not. And in order to be decolonial, you have to divest from colonial power. And what does that take? Political action.
Yep.
Continuous, collaborative, inventive, continuous effort. It's difficult. It's a hard process. It's a learning process. People feel daunted by learning. Like all of this decolonizing, anti-racism, social justice work and advocacy, that takes continuous ongoing education at your own gumption.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of it is working out their uncomfortable feelings. And then they can come to their own decisions about how they want to move forward with this kind of work.
Yeah.
So if the pendulum is all the way up here and it seems unfair for everyone, and I've been asked that, don't you think it's swinging a bit far the other way for the last 20 minutes compared to the last 1,000 years?
Yeah.
Okay, if that's how you feel, because yes, it does. Anything that has been held up this far for so long has to swing all the way back.
Before.
But that bites all of us. And we have to understand what our roles are then to help bring that back into balance.
And there's mistakes made along the way. Like
That's
I know
my
when it
point,
when it comes to land acknowledgement, I know I read the story maybe a couple of years ago, but Hayden King, the gentleman who wrote the land acknowledgement for Ryerson University, regrets it. But at the time was like, oh, this seems like a really good idea.
And it was coming from a cultural place.
Exactly. Yeah. But then since regrets it. And I think there's something really interesting about, was it a mistake at the time? Probably not. It's the idea, like when land acknowledgement started, probably a lot of Indigenous people who might look at that and are like, we're being acknowledged.
Yeah. Yes.
That's huge.
Yeah.
But it's not the end goal. I was kind of really excited about when you had mentioned the legend of the Northern Lights. One, do you mind going into this legend at all? Do you mind sharing that?
It's not a very long legend, but basically, and I know this legend is present in other cultures as well, but this is the one that I was told, is that if you go out on the land and you whistle at the Northern Lights, then they will come down and they will bring you up with them. So, some say that they will bring you up with them, which is what I am going to be.
Yeah.
And some say that they'll bring you up. I don't know, it gets a little gory. Cut off your head.
What lore isn't?
Cut off your head, and then there's spirits in the Northern Lights, and they'll play soccer with it.
Oh, fun.
That's a good one.
So,
that's really
but neat. If you whistle at the Northern Lights and you see them come down at you, you can rub your nails together like this, and they'll go back up into the sky. So don't worry.
If
it happens
If they're coming
it happens
for
to you at home.
Yeah,
Just,
you have a.
you heard it here first.
That's great.
Yeah, and then they go back up into the sky.
That's awesome. The reason why I was asking specifically is there's such a. We always learn like the either Greco-Roman, myth or like the very westernized version of something, and there's a lot of like sacred tradition within Indigenous cultures. Like storytelling is such a massive part of in any Indigenous community or culture that I've spoken with representatives of or people who are within that culture. They have all these incredible stories that have very, very different morality compared to the ones that we learn. I that goes from like, this is a thing about respecting your family or caring for your family or caring for the land and the environment, compared to Zeus came down, was a swan, and if you don't, he tricked everyone. If you don't know the rest of that story, it's maybe too vile for. But
he was a trickster.
Yeah.
Is all we'll say.
I do want to say that the thing that I noticed is, in general, there was something a little bit more applicable or palatable to me in this modern world than talking about somebody who fought a battle with a lion and then blah, blah, blah. Like, you know what I mean? I would just want to hear, or I just want to know in general, like, if there was more cross-section between theater and indigeneity, especially in storytelling, what would that look like to you? And what does that look like to you?
I mean, I guess what excited me about hearing that story is just the fact that, I got to connect in such like an authentic way with my grandma. And it's, there's so many different stories that are told, but I felt like this one was, it was told to me, and it was probably told to her by her mom, her grandma. And I felt like it's one that I could tell, and it's in an authentic way. I
hope that does come to fruition, because I want to see how they would conceptualize.
Yeah,
so man.
Like,
that sounds
I really
so cool.
do.
Thank you.
So too.
One explanation could be because we have our own storytelling style and dance and ways to showcase, demo, and party. Métis storytelling is a huge passion of mine, and dance, and it's combined. And I grew up with storytelling, and there is like a 400-year-old story from my family that we keep passing down.
That's incredible.
But this really rich storytelling style that is quintessential of our culture, where we've taken sort of the French, I don't know if tropes is the right word, but there's a certain way that the French tell a story and how the story unfolds, and there are certain characters.
Well,
the structure. There's certain characters in the story. They follow a certain way, and this is the end, and there's morality within it. And then they've also taken from Cree cultures or Innu culture way back in the day. And then taking that, part of the Indigenous storytelling and the different type of morality, things that are important to those communities to come out in the story, and just mash those together into like a perfect specimen of a story. And so we have those, like we have storytelling circles. We, like I said, my mom took us on the road. She was telling stories, and she's like, all right, dance, go monkeys, let's do this. And like showcase our culture and live it authentically. And those are real stories. It's a real storytelling tradition. We are already doing that any family party we have. There have been Native people everywhere. There was like one or two in the mainstream on the main stage, but there always has been.
Yeah.
There always has been.
Yeah, and stories have existed for like I think the thing is, even in that mainstream, quote unquote mainstream like theater, that really colonial theater space, like Thompson Highway is a good example of, here's someone who's written time and time again really wonderful plays that have gotten like their productions
critical acclaim,
critical acclaim.
Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Yes, and like their productions everywhere around the world, wherever. And there's elements of music in there because I think often, because it's such an important part of the culture, as music often is, and dance and things like that are always in there. But there's just the musical theater specifically side of it. It just feels like, why did we stop there? If we got inched this far, you know what I mean?
Because it's formulaic. It's in a certain way, and it doesn't mesh with the tradition.
Whereas theater, you can, any form really, right? Like there's some
but
rules,
very clearly, exactly, it can be married. Like very clearly, we can create specifically musical theater genre type art. So there are Indigenous artists that are like, oh, we can take up that space, like our stories and the way we want to tell it is valid. The other side to that, though, always, because there's always another side,
of course,
is that, are we to create for ourselves, or are we there to perform for the regular audience?
Yes, that's always such a tricky one, especially
what kind of stories do they want us to write? What kind of songs do they want us to craft?
Well, when I was talking about Corey Payette, like a lot of them are trauma informed stories about like residential school. Of course they're valid.
Yes.
But that's not all
the only
that's
thing
out there. And that's we talked about this last week too, of like people of color they have trauma. That's inherent in our world. But we're more than just the traumatic stuff. We're those beautiful stories with the Northern Lights and the want to get out and make something or whatever. We're the random stories where it doesn't matter that the person is whatever color or culture or whatever it is of
can
their
inform
culture.
the way that
of
they
course,
live
and it can,
their life.
Of course, but it doesn't have to be about that in such a like trauma informed way, and so I think that's it is what are the stories that people want to hear.
And I think it's tricky too, because right now, coming out of the last couple of years and all of it seems like in a way that's the reason. We're seeing a lot more of these traumatic shows. Yeah. I think it's as a way for people to, for the most part, inform themselves and the start of learning and bettering their journey to whatever it is that they are trying to do. But it could also sort of be to make themselves feel a little better because they went and saw the trauma show from this culture.
Maybe it's about our joy too. And like we said, getting hired, does it matter why they hired you? Yeah. Except that, well, it does if it affects you in a negative way. That's not what I mean. But for their purposes, does that matter? Yeah. Because you're allowed to have joy. You're allowed to use those opportunities to experience joy and express yourself and share your art and share your voice and kind of covertly fit stuff in there that you feel you need to when you have to say it, Like we're allowed to have joy just for the sake of creating and having joy.
And I think that's what I'm desperate for, is just stories of joy. And I think people do want to see that. Like a story of joy and of culture and of tradition that doesn't revolve around pain, or maybe it's just like personal pain rather than cultural pain. That could be really beautiful.
Which is informed by cultural pain, or cultural all the time. I totally hear what you're saying. And even if there is pain in a story, because first of all, that's just life.
Yeah, you want,
and secondly, you don't want a story. Like we need, but just being able to create the thing is personal joy, team joy, community joy, even if there's sadness, even if there's trauma in it. It's when we're expected to perform as in performative, like I'm a trained SEAL doing it for you.
Yes.
You don't get to dictate what stories I tell.
Yes.
Yeah. What excites me about this conversation is that because we got to some heavier parts, but what makes me excited is like having creators out there who are going to tell stories that seemingly are informed of like joy and a connection that you had with your grandmother, which I think is so special, and this like familial
I don't know why I almost
tradition.
started crying.
I know.
Hold it together.
What's happening?
Because grandmas are powerful.
Yeah. And then people like you, Seraph, who are out there very candidly, very intentionally, and not for nothing, very brilliantly. That's really what I mean.
You're talking about me?
Work,
Yeah.
I am.
Sure.
And there's some people in this world where you listen to them talk and you are like, I'm in good hands.
Aww.
And I feel like you're one of those people.
Oh, yeah.
You're a person where I see and I very much feel like we're in good hands if you're out there doing the work. And of course, is that work going to be like night and day changing, like, you know what I mean, from in a day? No, of course not. Like, it can't be. You said it's a slow moving tank.
Yeah.
But I think with you at the helm of that tank. You like that imagery?
Yeah.
Because you pulled back from the military.
I got a very good, clear
yeah.
Thank you.
But I think that maybe it's going somewhere instead of just rolling or standing still.
I just want to help people chip away at anything it is that we need to do to just keep moving the tank forward.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Last question.
That we ask every guest, and that is, what is your favorite thing going on in theater?
Are you drunk?
She's over it
What
already.
happened?
No, I want you to tell me something. And could you please speak it to me? And could you tell me what you like about theater?
I thought
Is
you were
what
going to
I'm
ask, like,
gonna ask.
Pepsi or Coke.
Final hard-hitting question.
This is a good question.
No, typically it is, what is the most exciting thing or that you think is happening right now in theater? It could be like...
this thing. Whatever is happening.
Yeah.
Not you.
She's not a thing.
Not your person. Not your person. The project. That's interesting.
Angela, yeah.
I guess just
Me!
the end. For me, it's just become such like a more like I got interested in it through TikTok and social media, and that's how a lot of young people are getting interested in that kind of thing. So it's really cool to see it expanding, and there's the walls are getting pushed down, and people are breaking out of boxes, and I think that's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
I agree. There are spaces opening up for people of color, Indigenous people, to create
the best like cohabiting world that we can live in is one that's symbiotic. Maybe that's the best word I can use, or mutually beneficial, whatever it is. That because we have to, and it's better when we do coexist as different cultures and everything. Like the best kind of world that we can live in my opinion, and the most maybe educational and the most full world that we can live in is one that is mutually beneficial for all these groups, where we're pulling from, here are these wonderful stories from this culture. They're both aesthetically pleasing, they're wonderful to hear, they're super entertaining, and they tell us about this issue in sustainability that we need to address. So it does all that, and here's this from this culture that does this same thing, and this culture, and that's where we get, like, ultimately the best world, in my opinion. It's utopian again. Maybe it's naive to think that we'll get there in our lifetimes, but
get on the tank.
But let's all hop on the tank. Yeah, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm hopping on the tank. Okay. Before we go, are there any plugs, final things that people want to Shout out.
No, I'm working on a thing, but I can't talk about it.
Cool.
I think we talked about my thing.
Yeah, get the name out there
Name
one more
it.
time.
Oh,
Does it have a name? I don't want to put you on the
It
spot.
does. It's called AQQ. It's AQQAQ, and it means Northern Lights.
Very cool, beautiful.
Lovely.
My TikTok is Julia Ulayuk, which is ULAYOK. And that's the same for my Instagram. Post all my songs on there.
Cool.
And she'll walk like 10 minutes later and there'll be all these likes for me.
I thought you were gonna be ambitious, be like all of our followers and the subscribers to the podcast. No. Blow it up to the next. Like, no,
We
me.
could. No, just me.
Kara, anything going on?
Rainbow Speaks is also an MTYP fan podcast.
In a way, yeah.
In a way.
We've sort of become that.
A great theater that is doing great work. And they are starting up their Native Youth Theater classes next week.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a young person in your life who wants to be in theater and explore indigeneity in theater, Native Youth Theater at MTYP.
Additionally, After School Leaders Program at MTYP has their program starting up. I'm only saying this because I got an email on my drama teacher, so it was like, sign your kids up. But it's a free musical theater program called Showstoppers there as well. I think that's it.
I think we just spoke.
Have a little bit of optimism, like a rainbow through a small glass prism. We want to search, we want to look, to listen, to see what we find. Sure, we've got a lot of old traditions, but we're interested in your new renditions. Help us understand what we've been missing for all of this time. Rainbow speaks, rainbow speaks.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Rainbow Speaks. Our hosts are Cuinn and Cuinn Joseph, and today's special guests were Seraph-Eden Boroditsky and Julia Davis. For the digital studio, I'm Daphne Finlayson, your technical creative director, and our content creative director is Dutchess Cayetano. Music for the show is provided by Duncan Cox. This podcast was recorded and produced on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional home of the Anishinaabeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Metis Nation. We gratefully acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts in making this podcast possible. Thank you so much.